Hello, and welcome to the Craft and Calling. I am your host, Christine Marie. Today, we are talking about how to grow your business, how to exponentially leap from being small, kind of working within the 800,000 to around the $2 to $3 million range, and what does it take to deconstruct the business so that it can effectively grow and grow for the purpose of whether you're trying to sell or scale or have your business as a succession plan for your family. I am so incredibly thrilled. Matteo, thank you so much for joining us. Co-founder of Reconstruct Consulting Group, where you all really work with implementing the systems and the leadership and clarity in place that's necessary to get the business to where it needs to get to. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So glad to have you, Matteo. It's really interesting because when we were in the green room, we were talking about what it is that you all are doing that really makes kind of that exponential change. And we were talking about how there's different aspects of the growth trajectory for businesses, and a lot of it is predicated on the leader. So I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about your experience and your story that's gotten you to where you are today, and then we'll talk about some really key. I think of it as kind of core tenants, like the pillars of a building that are necessary for the business to be able to get to the next level. But first and foremost, who are you?
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me on. I was very excited and feel very aligned with the work that you're doing and
Mm,
focusing on the growth and prosperity of contractors and the next generation of contractors. And that means a lot to us and means a lot to me.
yes.
So I started, as many do. My dad was into building and he worked more on our
Mm,
house and then kind of like would do work for other people, but he was like close to home, right? Because grew up not very much money. So my dad always said, this is what you got to do. You got to, your time and your sweat is your
mm,
investment. So he rebuilt our house and I watched him and continued on. And, you know, some people just fell in love with building. That was not me. I was kind of kicking and screaming, honestly. I didn't have anything that I was lined up that I was like, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go, be a coder or whatever. I was trying to make it, trying to survive, doing
Mm,
the best next thing that I thought was going to provide for me and provide a future. And so I just kept falling back into building. And
mm,
so that lasted throughout my 20s. And eventually I met someone who wanted to start a home services business in Hawaii. And
wow.
we just went for it. And that's where I learned a lot of grit, determination, and just like grinding through long days, endless days, 7 days a week. And we built
Mm,
this business from the ground up. And we started with 3 guys. We ended a couple years later with 80 people. We acquired a construction company, and we were just like just going to the moon.
wow.
And COVID hit, and so I ended up
Mm,
departing from that business. COVID hit. It was like time to be closer to home. I moved back to California, where I'm from, and but I learned business there. I really learned how to operate a larger company, how to scale, how to grow, and most importantly, the triage and what's important in that moment. A lot of times, guys starting out, they see a they see a flashy thing. They see a website that looks great. They see all these things that seem like the hallmarks of a great business, but at the end of the day, um, that might not be what gets you from here to there. It's just what gets you. It's what gets you recognition when you're already from here to there. When you've already grown, when you've already achieved a certain level of success, then all of these things start coming. But to someone who is just coming up, it looks like success. But that's not the thing that actually moves the needle. And so
mm,
learning to focus on what moves the needle was one of the biggest takeaways I got from that whole experience. And so I ended up through a long series of events, meeting my wife, moving up to Washington State, and that's where I live now, and started doing this work for builders, operating as a project manager for from within the business for custom home builders,
mm,
and realizing that I was just renovating their operation internally, their
mm.
business structure, and starting to operate a lot of the principles that I'd learned. And so
Right.
I kept being told by friends and family, hey, you should just do this. You should just start this company. You should do this full time, like help these companies to grow, prosper, restructure.
Mm,
And I did. Met my co founder, and the
wow.
rest is history. Here we are.
Love it. I love especially that you've done the work of actually scaling the business and selling it. And now you're teaching other people how to do the same. Because a lot of folks who are in the trades and trying to help the trades haven't actually, and I should say, a lot of folks who are trying to help the trades nowadays haven't actually been in it. They don't know what it's like to have the blood, sweat, and tears. And it's just a completely different experience. Like you said, you learned grit. And one of the things that I really appreciate you saying just now is effectively you learned how to maintain the focus necessary. And another element to this, Matteo, and I want to lean in here because you guys really do work with effectively new builders, folks who are kind of the next generation, not my dad, not your dad, who are, in their 60s, 70s and really have a tenured business or tenured experience. But
Yep.
it's more so like almost under 30, maybe under 35, these folks who are definitely newer. And frankly, they're open to learning. They're open to learning the systems necessary. I was talking to someone the other day and he was like, I was working with a garage door company and I've got all these systems that they need to put in place and they saw no need to move out of Excel. They were so content to do that. So, I want to talk with you about, when you're talking about focusing on one thing and really that being one of those core tenets to a successful business, especially with how much distraction there is. It is just absolutely insane. So I found that maybe our dads don't struggle as much with distraction, but the younger generation does. So as you're focusing with this younger group of builders and contractors, how are you guiding them? And what would you say to a young contractor who is like, man, there's such as the shiny object syndrome? What would you say to him?
Well, it's easy to say something that's tropey, that's like catchy,
Mm,
that's okay. I'm just going to give out this little piece of Dan Martell wisdom, right? But the trick is meeting them where they're at. So you got to find the
mm,
hook and find the entry point. So everyone has their own psychology they inherited from their family, right? So a lot of it is actually getting to know the person, actually caring about them as an individual, as a leader, finding out what makes them tick, and then reaching in there and difference between this that will take you from here to there and having something that is actually that is a lasting change, because any real change happens at the level of identity. It doesn't happen at the level of templates. It doesn't happen at the level of software. It's identity. It's who you are. And honestly, if that contractor was the kind of person who deserved to have a 5, 10, 15, $20 million business, he would have it.
mm.
He'd be the
And
person if he was the person.
so really it starts with who. It starts with who you are, and then from that place, then you kind of build on top. So perhaps even the who is the foundation. Like when we're talking about the core tenets of a successful business, maybe the who is actually the very foundation upon which those core tenets are set.
Yeah, that's why we start with our pillars. We start with strategize. So we want to go in and see what's happening, not just in the business, but inside someone's psychology, so that we have a foundation to build off of that is going to achieve long lasting results. Right. So I would say to someone who's looking at the shiny object, like, focus on what matters right now. What moves the needle? What's your biggest problem? You have no leads? Okay, cool. Anything besides active, like, focused, dedicated effort towards getting more leads is pointless. So now we use the experience. Once we identify that problem, we use experience to determine what's the most effective strategy to solve that problem, and then put the horse blinders on. And this is what you're
Mm,
focused on. You might have a secondary priority in there. You might have a third priority in there, but this is number one. This is the strategy, and now we're here to hold you accountable. You just
mm,
said this is the strategy. Now implement it. Now do your job. Right? Focus.
yes.
Don't get distracted. Do your job. And so when we meet, it's a lot of that. Like I had an owner who was very excited, extremely excited about getting a showroom. And I think for him that was like a big milestone. There was something about being seen and recognized as being established at a certain level, and that's what the
Mm,
showroom meant to him. So
mm,
that was going to cost money though. That wasn't
mhm,
going to make money. It was going to cost money in overhead and all this stuff. And so we
mhm,
really, over the course of many sessions, just had to beat it out of him. Like, hey man, this is actually just going to cost you money. Like, what's your main focus right now? Oh, you have two guys, neither one of which you really trust and can rely on. One of which has got one foot out the door, but you want to open a showroom. Okay, explain to me how that works, right?
Mm,
And so that seems obvious to someone on the outside. But when you're on the inside and you're struggling in the day to day and it feels overwhelming, you're looking for a light at the end of the tunnel that
mm,
feels achievable and it feels like it's going to solve the internal problem that you have, right? That's so common. I just want to feel better. I just want this. So we externalize that and get attached to something. And it could be a showroom, it could be an assistant, it could be a new Silverado, it could be any one of those things, right? And
mm.
other things besides. And so it's really like getting to the root of that, stopping that grabbing energy and getting laser focused on what's actually going to move the needle and making sure that the goals are aligned and it's taking you where you want to go. Like it's
Mhm.
actually where you want to go, not just where someone said you should be, right? That matters too.
So good. Matteo, I want to return to that process. Effectively, it's identity in terms of like who are you, what's there, and then the experience necessary, the how to get there, and then put blinders on. Did I miss a step in that process?
No, that's pretty. I
Okay.
would sum it up a different way. I'm one of the stream of consciousness type people, so I don't like to be put in a box. I don't like to put other people in a box.
All right.
So I
We'll
always end
add
up
to this then.
summarizing it a different way. But yeah, that encapsulates it pretty well.
Good, good. Because I want to go back to identity. I want to go back to psychology. You said this sentiment. You said everyone has their own psychology that they inherit from their family.
Mhm.
And for some, I would anticipate, I haven't seen many of these types of conversations in the trades before. Even on the podcast, most of the time we don't get that deep into conversations like this. So while we're talking about how to get to the next level of our business, it's so apparent because you've done it. You're working with founders to do this. It's so apparent and proven that actually it's predicated on who we are. So we have to talk about the identity piece. We have to talk about psychologically. Can you talk about that? You said we have our own psychology inherited from our family. What does that mean?
All right, this is one of my favorite topics. So everyone's born into a family, and I'm of the belief that we're born into that family for reasons, right? Or maybe not we're born into there for reasons, but it's helpful in development to put meaning into things. Whether it has meaning or not is kind of irrelevant. So if I have a father who's very strict and who's got kind of that military style discipline and all that stuff, like there's a reason I can make a meaning. I can make a reason why he was the dad that I got and why, like, what are the benefits? What's the silver lining? There's also going to be some challenges that you inherit from that, right? So looking at it with eyes wide open at the good and the bad and kind of separating out the hurt feelings from what could be beneficial or what could be harmful, and then learning to integrate that so that we don't see it as a curse or something that we are victimized by, but we use it by looking straight at the truth to empower us to make better decisions and to be the best version we can be. Otherwise, what happens is you live shrouded in falsehood, in misconceptions about yourself and about this thing's happening to me, or this always happens, or I act this way and I can't help it. Like any of these stories that are less than empowered, that are less than full of agency, we want to eradicate that. And so a lot of this, it's interesting because I'd like there to be a set process where like you answer these 47 questions and I'll tell you your psychology. And I found it doesn't really work like that. I look for entry points and hooks. So I'm looking for a spot where
Mm,
someone says something and in the back of my brain somewhere, it clicks and it says, oh, okay, there's something here. Let's drill into this. Let's talk more about this, right? Because
right.
if they come to us, they're subconsciously, they made up their mind that they want something different. I've
Hmm.
never found an exception to that rule. If they come to us, they've already made up their minds. Subconsciously, they want something different. So even if they don't intend it, oftentimes they bring stuff up that gives me that hook, that gives me that entry point into their psychology, and they're not even meaning to do it. But because subconsciously they already made the decision, this is the same subconscious at work that if you never look at it, if you never examine our motivations and how we're put together and why we're made the way we're made, that's going to cause you to run a successful business into the ground because you feel like you don't deserve it. Right? This is the same thing, same dynamic at play. So we harness that for the benefit of the individual by examining these inherited beliefs and then helping to remove the toxic ones and install healthy patterns in their place.
Mm. I love it's like, let's look at the inherited and then install new. It's so intentional because honestly, otherwise we're operating on default. We're
Mhm.
operating on autopilot in so many ways. And it's not just in terms of our behavior. It's like, how can you drive home and then not remember how you got there? It's like, wait, I actually have driven this way so many times, but if I was to give directions, I actually don't really know if I know how I got there. And so it's kind of like that with our thinking. We have these very core instilled stories in and about ourselves, about other people, about success, about finances, about the world at large. And so if we're not doing the work to actually encounter and kind of face those and square off with those, they very well could be in the driver's seat and potentially limiting us from the ability to get to that next level and the ability to experience real change. Um, Matteo, I want to, and you're frozen on my end, so I don't know. I don't know if it's my internet or yours, but I will just keep going until you cut me off, and hopefully you can hear me. Um, I'd love to lean into how we can. You talked about entry points and hooks, and one of the things that I have found that's most helpful for me to be able to kind of identify what are those narratives, what are those stories that I inherited. One of the best ways for me to do that is by actually dedicating space in my life whenever I encounter some kind of discomfort and any type of emotion that comes up that catches me by surprise. That's usually a sign that something's wrong. And a lot of times we see, especially in male dominated areas, we see anger expressed in a very intense and aggressive way that kind of catches both parties off guard. And what's interesting about this, and for those listening and who can't see, Matteo has left the building, and so I'm hoping he will join again. But I'm just going to keep going because this topic is so important. And for the most part, we don't talk about this too much on the Craft and Calling, but it is really core to being able to get our business to the next level and also getting clarity on what is it that you want to do? What is it that you're called to do? Because when we talk about, are you trying to scale your business, sell your business, or have it for succession? We actually need to handle the way that we operate the business differently based on what we want. And if we're not clear on that, it's going to be really easy, for example, that garage door company to say, oh, we'll stick with Excel, we'll stick with handwritten notes, and not actually do the work and kind of experience the pain that is necessary to implement a new system that will allow for you to get to that next level. But even just in me saying, do the work and take the responsibility to get to that next level, that can actually come from a core inner narrative of maybe it's complacency, maybe it's fear of failure. Maybe it's the discomfort at trying something new and I don't know what this process is going to look like. Here's something that's really important, and I'll get back to the anger point in just a moment. Y'all, it is human nature to avoid discomfort. We would rather choose the certainty of misery than the uncertainty of perhaps something better and something new, but we're not absolutely sure about what it will look and feel like at the end. What exactly will the process be to get there? Even if we knew that we would have a $5 million business, a 10, $20 million business, but we're not exactly sure of how to get there, we'd rather stay content with our $1 million business that is driving angst and anger in us because we're not at the 20 million, but we're actually not willing to do what it takes because of the fear of what it might take. So with this whole question of, well, okay, how do I identify the inherited beliefs? That that concept of really identifying and sitting with what emotions take you by surprise, what catches you off guard. And it could be an emotion, it could also be a thought. So those thoughts that run when someone going into a boardroom, going to a job site, even honestly, we see this with our families. What are the narratives we have about other people? Because so often we end up having them about ourselves. The way that we judge others is usually a reflection of the way we judge ourselves. So sitting with the discomfort, sitting with the anger, and then asking why, and following the why like a yellow brick road down to the core story, the origin story. Usually there's a story of what happened that led to us inheriting that narrative to begin with. So Mateo's back. Mateo, thank you for joining us again. I was just sharing a little bit. I took your tangent and ran with it about the inherited beliefs. So thank you for that. I was sharing a bit about my experience of working to identify what are the narratives for me that have come up and how do I actually get to the root, and really asking why has been incredibly helpful to just really sit with what is the core story that catapulted the narrative to begin. Was it modeled for me,
Right.
the viewpoint on the world or the narrative on the world, or was it something I actually experienced as a child that lended to me having a narrative of, oh, I'm alone, I have to do this on myself, and now it's in adulthood, it's really hard to receive help, for example. um, Anything else you want to add to that?
This touches everybody. There's no one who's exempt from these dynamics. So some people just have learned how to work with them better than others, or were born in a situation that through the roll of the dice, or however you want to look at it, uh, had certain advantages. And it's not, no one tried to give it to them. Like, for example, Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, there's a handful of others. They're all born within a year of each other. And they all had significant advantages when it came to the access to computers at their schools. This is a function of timing, a function of proximity to the school, not necessarily the best school, but the school that adopted computers at the right time when they were the right age to be able
Right.
to accelerate their timing. So some people were born into a family of builders, and they also had psychology implanted from their parents that was conducive to them doing the thing, right? They
Mm,
also probably had some darker sides of that, some downsides of the psychology that was implanted, both on purpose and on accident, that they contend with as well. Like nothing is all good and nothing is all bad. So I think
right.
that's the more we can integrate and learn from what we inherit, the more
Mm.
capable we are, and the more we're actually like looking at reality.
Mm. And I love this. So when it comes to, okay, that's kind of part one is analyze, understand what's inherited. And then two, it's install. So obviously, Mateo, you guys, this is your zone of genius in so many ways. For those listening, we'll talk at the very end about what it might look like if they want to come work with you guys. But for those listening who are driving right now between jobs and are like, okay, I actually am intrigued by this. Let me do the first part, which is asking why of the emotions that come up, and analyze what's the story, what's the narrative there, how do I view the world, but how do I then install a new narrative in its place? How do I, we don't just want to take out the bad, but how do we implant something good? There's a book, it's very short, called As a Man Thinketh. And I
Mhm.
love that book. It's almost like the book of Proverbs in the Bible. It's just like all these good little sayings about the mind is like a garden. And so if we pull something out, well, if it just remains as it is, it might grow back weeds. So we can't just pull something out. We need to plant something new with intention and install a new program. So how do we go about doing that?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's two frames for this. One is you're doing it alone, or what feels like alone, and two is with mentorship. So mentorship is the accelerant. There's a lot of ways to get that. It could be your uncle, it could be probably not your parent. Maybe it is your parent, but could maybe not be, depending, because they had a really key hand in building the dynamics, right? So it can be really helpful to have that be someone external to those relationships. But you never know. Sometimes it's the parent is the right one in later in life as adults. So there's that part of it that's like having intentional conversations with people who have your best interests at heart, who don't have an
Right.
ulterior motive, and who see who are able to see you clearly and see your patterns. And then this is someone that you can also be vulnerable with about the things that you struggle with, right? So it's that reliance on our peer group or on our mentorship. Church is often a place where that's found. You can find people who you want to be like. And number one criteria for that is that you want to be more like that person, right? I definitely, that's number one. Then the other is for someone who feels like they're doing it alone. They're not actually doing it alone, because you can go and get mentorship from other people in the form of books, in the form of podcasts, right? So it really comes down to intentionality. So why are we doing that? Why are we consuming this media, right? You'll scroll Instagram all day long and you read something on Instagram about business and think that that actually changed you. But it doesn't. We're just consuming something that we could regurgitate later, but it doesn't go in deep enough to actually change a person. That's why this books and even longer form podcasts are helpful. Like if you feel yourself, if the emotion doesn't swell with it,
Mm.
then it's not deep enough. And
Mm.
if it doesn't like make you uncomfortable or make you want to cry or make you like react in a visceral way, it's not, you're not operating at the identity level. You're just conceptualizing it and thinking about it, but that's not enough. You've been thinking about all sorts of things your whole life, but until you accept it into your identity, it doesn't create meaningful change. So I would say if someone is feeling alone in their journey, one really cool way to solve for this is to like read autobiographies of people who have struggled. Like get
Mm.
inside the mind of someone who has struggled. And that could be listening. I used to listen on job sites all the time, just constant repeat, different audiobooks that were helpful on job sites when I'm doing, I'm mudding a room. There's nothing else to do besides mud the room. So might as well be like enriching myself with some of this and allowing it to sink in. And a lot of it comes down to intentionality. But I often find that when someone feels like they're in it alone, and then they put the intention out there to start to uncover some of these patterns, start to work through it, they often attract someone who can support them in doing the work.
So interesting. Your point about the emotion. I just had this while you were talking. I just had like this little visual of effectively like drilling into the earth. Like you're drilling through the logical mind and
Mhm.
drilling, and then when you hit the emotion, you've hit oil. Now you know you've gone deep enough.
Yep.
And until we hit that level of emotion, it's the integration of intellectual intelligence with emotional intelligence that allows for real change. It's like they have to come together and the emotion has to be sparked, otherwise it's just head knowledge, it's not heart. Like the real heart impact allows for heart change and thus life change. So I love that you said that. And Mateo, there's something about you saying that coming from the male perspective. I think that a lot of times, because the IQ is more so in the left hemisphere, which is more so what we deem as masculine or male traits, versus the feminine, which is more so the nurturing and the care in the right hemisphere, which is where emotions live. Yet people buy off of emotions. Harvard found that to be true. And so we can't just be operating in just the logic for the sake of our businesses, but also for the sake of ourselves. Like we're cutting off 50% of the human being if we're not allowing our emotions to have a seat at the table. And Mateo, I viewed emotions as weakness ever since I was a child. Like I saw the damage emotions did. Um, I saw, someone being so angry. And then I also saw the lack of being able to challenge that anger. It was really chaotic on an emotional level. So it was chaotic in anger, but then it was also chaotic in the response, which was a lot of tears. So I'm sitting there as a kid watching anger versus tears, and I'm like, nothing, none of this is effective. Let me
Mhm.
just shut down and not, and then I saw even someone else, their reaction was just complete and total being cold. So for many of us, I think we have those childhood moments. And talk about narratives. The narrative we may have around even the thought of accessing our emotions is an inherited program or an inherited narrative. So to install something new, it's almost like we have to be willing to confront the emotion of that thought in even in and of itself. Like, am I willing to experience an emotion? Because for I think a lot of us, we have almost like a misattributed um, thought and feeling around emotion in and of itself, that it is weakness. How did you get to the point of being able to access your emotions and kind of be brave enough to do that, but also recognize that this is actually core and essence essential to change?
That's interesting. So there's something fascinating about this because I think that for me, in my experience, men and women process emotions differently. So like the core what it is very similar, right? If I'm sad and you're sad, that's similar. But I lean back on historical models and the way
Mm,
that men and women have operated and conducted themselves differently over
mhm,
time. And this isn't true of every culture, and there's a lot of nuance here. But in general, men are missing connection with other men in a significant way in this society, and a model by which to process through the things that occur.
mm,
And there's this idea from what looks to me like an attempted homogenization of the world of feelings, that like if a man is having this feeling and a woman's having this feeling, or someone who is more feminine is having this feeling and versus more masculine, we treat them the same. Like I don't treat my emotions the same way I treat my wife's emotions. Totally different, right? And when I'm hurt, when I'm upset, when anything else is going on internally for me, like I don't want to run to someone for a hug. That's just not how I operate. But that doesn't mean that I just shove everything down. So it's like being willing to look at what's there and then learning what the appropriate way that you work with those emotions is. And it's
yes.
different for different people. Like I'm not the guy who's just going to go like cry to my wife. If you need to
Yeah.
do that, that's up to you. But I'm
Mm,
more likely to call one of my bros and be like, "Hey man, I'm super struggling with this thing. Can we talk
mm,
this out?" And then he's going to listen, and he's probably going to red team my position on whatever it is.
hmm.
He's going to come in and like attack where I'm weak and be like, "Look,
Yeah,
dude, you're not seeing the whole picture."
right.
And he's not going to
I
sit
feel
there
it
and be
too.
like, "Yeah, tell me more about your feelings with this," and like cry it
Mm,
out. That's not how we operate. So he's going to red team my position and be like, "Dude, you're breaking this. You're screwing up right here. This is a
mm,
problem. You got to see this is a problem." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I see this as a problem. You broke down my defenses and like all the ways that I thought I was right." And that's a healthy dynamic. And it's steel
mhm.
sharpens steel, right?
Yeah,
That's the way that I look at operating through a lot of these emotions from the masculine polarity.
good.
I
I
don't treat
love
my
all
wife
that.
that way.
Yeah.
Right?
You're like,
She
"Let
needs
me be
something
clear."
different from me. But
Yeah.
when we're looking at this world, like it's a very similar it's a very similar thing that plays out when you're working on the identity level because you're not dealing with a child anymore. Like when
Mm,
we're working these problems, you're dealing with an adult. So there's a temptation that's like, well, I need to like access my inner child or whatever story that is. It's like, no, you need to parent your inner child. You're
yes.
now an adult and you're parenting a hurt child. So like
Mm,
be that means like be tender with oneself when you're at an edge that feels like I don't know where this could go, or it's scary, or it's difficult, or whatever, right? Give
mm,
oneself grace, but that does not give you permission to act like a child. These are two different things. Be the parent.
so good.
You're an
So
adult. Act like it. And if you
ugh,
need, there's proper places to express whatever emotions are bottled up within. This is not a reason to like not cry or not experience grief. I lost my mom when I was young. I had a lot of grief to experience, but I found that uh, safe place with like my aunties and people who could support and hold that in an appropriate way to where it was like processed through and not being externalized on the world or externalized on my relationships, right? Where that would
mm,
often come out. You lose a parent young, I lose my mom young, creates an interesting dynamic when it comes to having relationships because I have all this grief and trauma, right? That's what I've
right.
inherited. So processing through that well, thoroughly, and fully, now I'm in a relationship that
It looks like Matteo froze again. It's interesting just listening to that reflection. It's not just that we need to process this in terms of who we are and go back to the inherited uh, areas of our lives in terms of narratives, the way that we see the world, beliefs, but really it's, man, we lead from that place. Matteo talking about, we need to be the parent to that child. We also need to be able to be the leader in the boardroom and be the leader in the bedroom. We want to actually be consistent in how we show up across every level of analysis, regardless of who we're engaging with. Now, to his point, having the ability to almost adjust and temper delivery for his wife versus his COO. But what is so important is that he emotionally is able to be able to take care of that little kid and have that little kid under effectively the charge of the parent. Because when we see the lashing out, when we see the uproars and anger, um, I experienced that as a kid, and other people have experienced that both as a child and on the job site. But in order to keep that under control, it's so important that we do this work, because otherwise that little kid is going to be the one in the driver's seat, not us as the parent who is the real leader that we want to be. And so when we're talking about installing these new behaviors, I loved the part. I want to add one thing to it. So he said two things. Men are really missing relationship with men. It's that accountability that Matteo said, when he would be able to call his buddy and be like, hey, I'm processing through this, I'm moving through this. And then his buddy can be like, hey, you're missing these elements. And I know Matteo and his partner, co-founder Adam, they offer this as a part of what they do for businesses. So one, relationships with men, that's a way to do it. And second, it's the model to process emotions through. And one thing that I really appreciate is he said to process emotions through. Emotion is like a tunnel, and we have to move through it to get to the other side. Otherwise, we stay on the outskirts, or we stay stuck in the emotion. We suppress, or it's stuck and it's still within us. But in order to move through it, and in order to get out of it, in order to effectively leave it behind and not have it have control over us, we need that model. And I really, really love the element around being able to process with another person. And then the third thing I would say too, and this is a conversation I had with another gentleman on the Knowing Show. He said he said the number one thing it's so important for men to do is jujitsu or some type of physical activity to actually release the energy in their body. He said that's the number one thing. He coaches men. And he said that is a number one thing I would encourage men to do as an emotional release. And he said aggression is like the pathway to a man's soul, which that line out. Wow, that's powerful. So really when it comes to men moving through emotion, and I will say, I actually as a woman, I do not process emotions in that way. I actually don't like talking to another person, um, whether it's crying with them or just talking through it. I actually need to go inward and really figure out. And I kind of have my own model and process of moving through emotions, but it's really important because I don't want to linger there. So a question I think for all of us is, what is my ideal? What do I want? How do I want to show up emotionally with my family, with my kids, with honestly, even with my team, with my partners, co-founders? Because y'all, when we think about legacy and what we leave behind, it's the financial piece. It's also, yes, hopefully a business, but it's also the relationships that we build along the way. Legacy is financial and legacy is relational. So it really actually comes down to, what do you want your relationships to look like, feel like, sound like? And then working backwards from there. Okay, well then who do I need to be in order to deliver that kind of experience? Matteo, I wanted to move to the next piece of this, which is experience, how to get to the next level. So it's kind of like, okay, internal, this is some of the work we need to do. Okay, external, what are some real practical tactics that you have employed um, for your clients, your customers in the past? What are some of the things that have really moved the needle for them to grow their business?
So what's really moved the needle the most, I touched on this earlier, is really zeroing in on what the next right thing is to do.
Mm,
So a lot of people I see distributed focus is probably is the single biggest thing. And then half measures is another one. I mean, there's a lot of things. It gets a little complicated. The model is simple for the most part. Construction model, it's not like massive corporations. Like it is not that complicated. But the execution of the model thoroughly and properly is complicated because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with something that already exists, right? I don't get people who have never been in a business like coming to me and saying, "Hey, I've got $50,000 in the bank. I want to set up the business the right way. How do I do that?" Like that doesn't happen very frequently. If that's you, reach out because we can make something great very easily. But most often there's an inherited set of circumstances that we get. And so it's about parsing through that and finding what is the biggest point of leverage right now. It could be a team restructure, it could be uh, finding a way to get more leads. It could be fixing production problems. It could be hiring. Like it really is individual. That's why template packs don't work. That's why one size fits all models. And like a lot of the coaching that's out there, it's not as effective because they're not taking into account like what the actual person is experiencing.
mm.
There's
Good.
definitely
So,
tons of coaches that are great out there. I don't want to throw shade on the industry. There's great coaches out there, but what they're going to do is they're going to talk with you until they understand where your actual problems are, find the point of
mm,
biggest leverage, lever on that with everything you have. It's like Elon Musk talks about this all the time. You got to find the smallest point you can to apply pressure to that has the maximum impact and then put all your force on that.
what have you found that a lot of people like miss or forget or overlook? A lot of times, that smallest point of impact that can have the biggest leverage, honestly, it's not sexy. It's not flashy. It's kind of boring. It's usually the very thing that built your business in the first place. So I love this point. What are you seeing that these companies are kind of returning to?
Uh, well, I spent an hour and a half with a client a couple days ago. Uh, that I told them to write down their roles and responsibilities of four. There's four key leaders in this business. So we're working not just with one owner, there's three owners and another key individual. And I told them to write down their list of roles and responsibilities of what they're supposed to do. And then we reviewed it in a meeting and I went through and picked it apart line by line of what their roles and responsibilities are. And just because they had never got that down on paper, they've been operating for 3 years and they've been fighting about who's responsible for what because there was no clear roles and responsibilities of, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to own it and it's mine. And if the ball drops with this, that's my fault. And you're going to own that. And if the ball, I trust you to do your job. And if it fails, I know you're going to feel bad. I'm not going to beat you up. Like if you there's a failure, so like clear roles and responsibilities. You do this, I do this, right? So for a lot of businesses, just being able to literally map out, write down, pen and
Mm,
paper. This is not complicated. They spend all this time on ChatGPT looking for a tool to create an org chart to map out roles and responsibilities instead of grabbing a piece of
yes.
paper and a pen and just writing it out. And that's as someone who uses AI all the time. But like, you don't need fancy tools to do this. You just got to get back to basics, get organized, get it out on paper, and then operate in that model and then tweak and adjust as you go. But
So good.
it's not sexy at all.
No, it's not sexy. And it's, I think about, I call it the three C's: our competitors, our colleagues, and even our customers. So often they're the ones driving the ship. And we're actually not the ones in the driver's seat. We're listening to everybody else. It's all external versus internal. And I'm excited to have your co-founder on here, Adam, to talk about kind of the internal drivers versus external. So I'll save that conversation. But to this conversation, man, it's wild how much we're reactive versus proactive. Even grabbing that sheet of paper, writing down your roles and responsibilities. Now you're the one actually taking charge of your business rather than just putting out fires all the time.
Definitely, definitely. So that's a big one. And then there's a narrative around hiring that there's no good people and all people suck. And it's like really like depressing narrative. And that's just not true. It's not true. It's a very good reason why you can't grow your business. It's a very good excuse why you can't grow your business. It's actually not true. There's great people all over the place. They're already working for someone else. How do you think that house over
Mm,
there that's getting built that looks amazing is getting done? It's because they got
yeah.
great people. There's like this whole narrative, and a lot of it you could sum it up to misconceptions about reality. They're like, okay, this is, there's no work, there's no good people, like all of this defeatist mentality, which stems back to that identity level stuff. That's why you have to fix it at that level, because it all trickles
Mm,
down from the leadership. That mindset trickles down. So then that brings me to another key point, which is culture, and like, what are you actually building, right?
mm,
Allowing toxicity to remain inside of a team,
mm,
absolute failure. Absolute
yeah.
failure. So policing one's culture so that we create an environment in which high performers will thrive, and we focus
Mm,
on finding, hiring, training, and retaining high performers. That's another just like worth its weight in gold.
mm. So good. The time to really train, because to your point, it's the top down. I actually had my brother on the Craft and Calling a little bit ago, and we were likening, the leadership team to commanders on the field of battle. Who are your generals? And who are the PMs are effectively like the colonels, and you've got these people who are really like the representative of the founder owner brand, and it's the brand.
Mhm.
So really being clear on, okay, well, who do we want to be? Because the same analogy, the same conversation around, what's the foundation of the who as the individual is also the same concept of, well, who is the brand? What are the
Yep.
values? What's the mission? Why are we getting out of bed every morning? It's the same kind of thing. Like, we need to know who we are personally and as a company, because otherwise there's going to be, man, just so much inconsistency. And to your point, the bad apple that can be highly, highly, man, it can be poisonous. It like
Yep.
permeates throughout the entire team. So
Brand is another fun one because most builders, especially new ones, are like, build house, that's the brand.
yeah.
I build house brand. It's like the last thing to think about.
Yes.
But building trust, building repeat clients, that kind of thing, it matters. Like, having that name definitely matters. But this is where you get back into the details, right? Devil's in the details. Does the brand matter? Absolutely. Does it matter if you're a one-man shop who's trying to find work next week? Like, probably don't focus on that. You need to focus on the long term, on the medium term for sure. But when it comes down to what do we do tomorrow, that's where
Mm,
it's like, this matters. And honestly,
mm,
one of my favorite parts of my job is shepherding people from the like $300,000 range and getting that breakthrough to building an actual team. And from here to there,
mm,
because that's really where you see a carpenter turn into a business owner. Is you
yeah.
can do it at that range, and then they just grow and grow and grow from there. A lot of times
Mm,
people fall into it and end up having a $2 million business without having to do that transition through a
mm,
series of circumstances that occur where it's basically luck. It just falls into their lap.
mhm,
They're so good at the production, they're so good at doing the work that it just happens, right? But the back end is terrible. They couldn't get a business loan if their life depended on it. Like, none of the other stuff is actually working, and they're getting home at 7 or 8 at night. That's another
mm,
factor. It's just like, home life balance or a work life balance is an overused term, but that's a goal for a lot of our clients, is to be able to get to the games, to get home before dinner, that kind of thing. And like, that only happens with systems. It only happens
mm,
with a team you can rely on. And if you're up all night worrying about some toxic player on your team that you don't have the guts to fire, like,
yes.
that's not a life I want to live. Like, how do
No.
we how do we move through that, right? What how do we change ourselves to create a different reality?
Mm,
Fundamentally, that's the question. It's always the
mm.
question.
And there's so much power in that. There's
Yeah.
so much power. Man, as we're looking at 2026, one question, one practice, what's one thing that those listening can do to identify what's my one thing?
Mm. Write down all the things.
Mm,
And all the things you think are important for the business, prioritize that list, and then prioritize that list once a day until that prioritization doesn't change. Continue to think about it. And once a day, look at that list of all the things. Okay, so I need leads. I need to hire someone. I need to do this, that, the other, right? All the things that you got to do in your business, make it exhaustive and check that priority list and make sure that thing doesn't change. And then only do the top 3 things on the list until they're solved for. And then it
Yeah.
continues on, changes again.
Good. Love it. Love it. Get it all out of your head. Matteo, thank you so much.
These people have everything they need in order to continue on, in order to create a beautiful business, right? You have what you need.
Yes. So good. Matteo, how can folks work with you and Adam and your company?
So reconstructconsultinggroup.com is our website. You can go on there. There's a booking link on there. And we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. So you can find us anywhere under Reconstruct Consulting Group.
Wonderful. Y'all, these guys, they're really making big change in the business. And I'm so privileged and grateful to have you here today, Matteo. Thank you so much. And
All right.
is there anything else you'd want to add before we jump?
That's it. You can do it.
You can do it. Nice. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us on the